Hello and welcome to this Autovista Group webinar. Today we're taking a look at our EV outlook for 2025 and we're going to be answering the question, what is in store for Europe? I'm Tom Geggus, the editor of Autovista 24 and I'm going to be your moderator today. On our panel of experts is Dr Christof Engelskirchen, Autovista Group's chief economist, Anna Azofra, Autovista Group regional head of valuations for Southwest Europe and Poland, Christoph Ruhland, Autovista Group Director of Business Development, and Christian Schneider, EV Volume's Director of Content. So what can you expect from this fantastic panel today? Well, we've broken down our webinar into three sections. First up, we're going to be taking a look at the progress of the electric vehicle transition in Europe. Then we're going to move on and have a look into the BEV residual values and asking, have they hit rock bottom? Then in our final segment, we're going to explore whether BEVs have a TCO advantage. And then finally today, we are going to be holding a Q&A session with our experts. So please, throughout this webinar, feel free to post any questions you have, and we'll try to make sure we answer them by the end of the webinar. Now, if we don't, please don't worry, because we will get back to you by email after the webinar is over. So first up, Christian, I'm going to come to you. What is the state of electrification in Europe? Is the situation really as bad as it seems?
Thank you, Tom, and good morning all. So what we can see on that slide is how the total European new car volume for light vehicles, so meaning passenger cars and LCVs, has developed over the past years. And you can also see in different colors the share of the different propulsion and fuel types. And what we can see is that in 2024, so we definitely saw a recovery of the total market. So the total market volume was roughly growing by 400,000 units, but we are still lagging far behind our pre-pandemic levels, so where we reached something like a little bit more than 20 million units. But we could also see a little bit in contrast to that slightly growing trend for all vehicles is that BEV sales were slightly dropping last year, but 10,000 units, it's a marginal drop. So I would more say it is a stable market. But in terms of share, it was even dropping by roughly half percentage point, the BEV sales last year. PHEVs were also staying stable as the other EV type in the market. And the biggest winners have been full hybrid and mild hybrids last year, which were slowly replacing ICE sales and gaining new customers as well. The main, I don't want to stick too much in the past, but the main reason for that was, because of a lot of governmental changes. We spoke also in previous webinars about that, I think. So Sweden cut incentives, Germany was cutting incentives, and we also see quite a big economic uncertainty in the market, why some people are holding back their buying decisions for BEVs maybe at the moment.
Well, it might be useful, Christian, if you could highlight how Europe compares to other regions like China and the US. There's been a lot of criticism from Chinese OEMs that Europe's industrial policy towards electric vehicles is a little soft. So maybe we could see what this reflects in adoption rates.
Yeah. I think, if we have only our European perspective at the moment, it really feels like there is no big real growth in BEVs at the moment. It is like stagnating, as I said. It's maybe even dropping. But if we look more on a global picture, especially on China, we can clearly see that the global trend for BEV electrification is still rising. So even in China, we just saw something nearly 1 million more BEVs sold in 2024 than in 2023 because of strong targets that they have in place and also strong actions that the government is taking to boost BEV sales in China. So while we are stagnating in Europe and also in the US, so the third pillar that we can see here in green, the US, we are more or less stagnating or slightly growing in the US. China is really continuing its growth story for electrification.
So maybe then let's return to Europe, because obviously within the region, there are a lot of different EV adoption rates between countries. But maybe you could explain how drastic this difference is and what the explanation behind it is.
Yeah. So we cannot see on this slide a few European countries, not all, but a few European countries ranked by its electrification share, so BEV plus PHEV share in those countries. And it is maybe not super surprising that we see the Nordic countries like Norway, Denmark, Sweden on the very top of that ranking, and more southern countries like Spain and Italy, but also eastern countries like Poland, Romania, Hungary, more on the bottom of that list. So I also don't want to stick too much on why it is so great in the Nordics. It is mainly because those countries have a lot of money that they could spend also to boost electrification, to give high incentives to invest into infrastructure. But I just wanted to highlight that was maybe the biggest surprise also for me, that Portugal, as a southern European country, maybe not the richest country that we have in Europe, still reaches a relatively high share here. So even countries which don't have the highest per head income in Europe can reach high shares like Portugal. I mean, every third car that have been sold there last year has been powered by an electric engine. And it is mainly also due governmental incentives that have been in place until mid of last year. Portugal is still thinking about introducing our scrappage scheme instead of that. The distances in Portugal are relatively short compared, for example, to its neighbor country, Spain, where you have very longer distances on average to drive. So it is quite convenient. Winters are not so cold, so even a positive thing for BEV, for driving in a BEV. So all of those things are playing in to even help more southern countries to boost electrification.
Now, it's obviously a huge factor, as you said, is governmental behaviour and action. And the European Commission has published its industrial plan quite recently, its industrial action plan. Christoph Engelskirchen, what does this mean for the region's CO2 roadmap? And what new timelines are we really looking at? And what can we expect?
Exactly, Tom. So there have been some cries for help from many parties in Europe, and probably one of the most prominent one is the one from ACEA, so the Car Manufacturer Association, from February 2025. And they asked for some relief around the penalties, and the EU has now reacted. They have maintained the targets, so they have maintained the ban for petrol-powered cars by 2035. They also have maintained the more ambitious fleet CO2 target for 2025. However, they have given car manufacturers some breathing room, some breathing space, as they called it. So in the period 2025 until 2027, you will be judged by your average CO2 emissions towards the 2025 target. So, it could be positive, but it could also be a little bit of a, devil in disguise. So if you don't do a good job in 2025, you will have to over deliver in 2026 and 2027. I think it's smart for the time being to do it like this because it'll alleviate some of the pressure. Also, possibly a little bit of the supply pressure, which will be negative for RVs. But then, we're going to have the same discussion in 2026 and 2027. There is also an important point here. This is the third bullet on the slide around the EU trying to coordinate a little bit better around incentives and lessons learned from incentives. And if you look a little bit more closely across markets, what doesn't really do it is purchase incentives for new car buyers or corporate company car buyers, corporate car buyers. That doesn't help to stimulate demand on used car markets. So whatever they're going to come up with, hopefully it'll be also directed towards increasing adoption on used car markets, because you can't make the transition happen on new car markets if you don't address demand for those buying the used car, as we all know.
Absolutely. I think there's some real concern, particularly in news media. And the question is there a chance that we've already peaked, Europe that is, when it comes to EVs? And is the region now backing off from buying them?
Exactly, Tom. So the obvious answer has to be no, because we haven't peaked yet, and the EU just reconfirmed their targets, and at the moment it's not achievable without a full electrification of the industry. automotive industry. So no, we haven't peaked yet. We can see here some countries. We could have picked other ones, but I just wanted to show the picture is diverse, right? So we have some markets where it is still rising, and we have, for example, Germany, which is of course a really important market because of the volume of cars. It's it's not. I mean, it dropped in 2024 a little bit, but now again, it's towards the end and it's stabilizing. Yeah, so we can't really call it a drop. Yeah, in sales. Yeah, so it's stabilizing. So no, hasn't peaked yet.
So could you take us through some more kind of regional examples, Christoph?
Yes, we prepared another slide, which I think is quite important to also consider. It's not just about waiting for the government to incentivize BEV buying or disincentivize ICE buying. It is also about the OEMs, the car manufacturers, to take ownership of that transition, and we see that happen. So why am I saying this? So we are seeing on these charts the three lines for several countries. The one that is rising the fastest is the new car price development indexed for passenger cars that are powered by petrol engines. Yeah. So what does this mean? Car manufacturers are actively increasing prices for petrol cars. Why? First of all, because they need to pay the bill in terms of transitioning to electric mobility, but also because that is actually improving the economies around buying a BEV and a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. Yeah, so they are in control, the car manufacturers, to make that transition happening by, in this case, as we can see it across countries, by making ICE buying a little bit less attractive economically.
So I suppose this has all been leading up to Autovista Group's EV volumes outlook for Europe. Christian, where do we see EVs going in the next 10 years or so? And is it an optimistic outlook or one of pessimism?
So, I mean, we heard a lot about what Christoph, about all the regulations that will come. So the proposal by the Commission that has still go through the Parliament. So what we can see here is the status quo of our European forecast before any changes done to the current legislation. So it means still from this year on, the full penalties would be in place. And we would see in that forecast that we did in December last year, that after a small dip, like I showed before in 2024, so that BEV share in Europe, so the dotted line, is starting to speed up again. What will change, and I mean, I'm speaking to our forecaster team at EV Volumes, who are heavily working on our implementing the new situation in Europe. So we think it is relatively, or the probability is very high that it will also go through the Parliament, what the Commission has proposed. So with that, having that in mind, what we think how the forecast that you can see here will change is that we will also see in Europe a slightly flatter behavior in 2025 and 2026. Not completely flat, but a little flatter than here. And that it will then dramatically, like Christoph also said, has to speed up until 2027 towards, and will more or less afterwards follow the line that you can see here, going towards our 2023 overall goal to being more or less fully electric with a few exceptions. And what is maybe worth to mention, that we think that the countries in Europe will be affected in slightly different ways by this new proposal from the Commission. So we think that countries which are relatively advanced already with their BEV uptake, like Denmark, for example, or Netherlands, who also have strong local targets in place, they will not really be affected. We still think they will continue to grow their BEV adoption group story, even like without that Commission proposal. But we think that other countries who are already behind now, like Poland, so the orange line here, but also Spain and Italy, who don't have that strong national targets and uptake in place at the moment, that they will use that and flatten a little bit their demand even more in 2025 and 2026. But then again, they have to speed up even more in 27 and the years after to reach their overall targets in 35.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Christian. Well, that does bring us to the end of our first section in today's webinar. Still to come, we're going to explore TCO and finish up the Q&A session, so please do make sure to keep on getting your questions coming into our team. But now, let's move over to the used car market. Anna, I'd like to find out, are the dark clouds over used battery and plug-in hybrids really as dark as they seem?
Okay, thank you, Tom. Let's look at three different cases, different dark clouds representing three different country profiles. Starting with Europe's largest market, Germany, this graph illustrates offer price trends since January 1st, 2024. And you can find the color legend visible at the top right. It's important to remind that the position does not indicate a higher or lower residual value, but rather its own evolution over time. And we can observe the most significant adjustments occur in 2024, with the BEVs, the dark green line, experiencing the most drastic decline. And now, although prices remain on a downward trend, the pace has slowed. And the previous price adjustments have already contributed to easing market congestion, and adjustments this year are expected to be milder. And regarding PHEVs, initially more impacted, have also stabilized. And although it's not the focus of this webinar, there are more barriers for full hybrids, performing worse than PHEVs in some periods. And reasons are not only related to technology, but also to brand origin. Usually the brands that offer hybrids are not the ones that attract the most interest from German buyers. On the next slide, we present a different case, a different country, Belgium. And we wanted to bring this data here because in our last webinar, Autovista 2025 RV Outlook, that you can still find in Autovista 24 site, Belgium was one of the countries expected to experience a larger adjustment, negative 4%. And we received several questions about the reason behind this outlook and whether it was linked to a higher presence of BEVs. And indeed it is, but in addition to this, if we compare Belgium to a bigger market like Germany, we see the trends are similar, but not at the same time and not in the same way. The time it takes for the market to adapt from these two countries is completely different. Smaller markets have fewer shock absorbers, less market inertia, and react faster to changes in pricing, competition, regulations. Then the outlook is more negative in Belgium this year. However, the impact in 26 is expected to be minimal and even positive by 27. And finally, in the next slide, Spain, as an example of markets where EV adoption is lower, as Christian already mentioned. And we would like to present this data through our KPIs, market trends that you can also find on our residual value intelligence tool. One of them is the age of the cars on offer, the first of the three charts. And we see there is no relevant aging effect of the electric vehicle supply in Spain. Moving to the chart in the middle, we find another key metric. The average stock days is an early indicator of market saturation. And we see that stock days rise for BEVs and PHEVs at the end of the year due to the pressure to place these cars in the market. However, as we can see in the third and final chart, prices dropped at the beginning of this year and Spain was back to stability. Therefore, these indicators continue to point to a relatively stable situation in Spain, negative moderate in large markets like Germany, and more pronounced in smaller markets like Belgium.
Thanks, Anna. So maybe give some real-life examples. What does this mean when I'm shopping for a used BEV across different markets?
Okay, sure, Tom. If we move to the next slide, here we see we have selected this example of a used Hyundai Kona, 3 years old and 45,000 kilometers. Sorry, is the base version across the 3 markets, same battery, and in all cases 204 horsepower. And we have chosen Hyundai to avoid country of origin bias. And this information can also be found in our compare tool. And the blue bar represents the list price, the magenta shows the trade value, and the green bar indicates the retail price, meaning what a private customer pays when buying this 3-year-old car. And without considering any incentives, the highest price for this car, as we see as new vehicle, is in Germany. However, mainly due to the lack of used BEVs, the model retains much more value in Spain after 3 years, both at trade and retail levels. And despite holding a much higher value from a dealer perspective, we could say that the German market is far more attractive and profitable, as the margin between trade and retail, let's say the dealer's margin, reaches almost 20% in Germany. This translates to approximately 3,100 per car, euros per car, compared to 2,200 euros in Spain or 2,100 euros in France. It's true that we also have to take into consideration that the stock costs for a dealer in Germany are higher. And then from a manufacturer or leasing company perspective, the best strategy is to buy used vehicles in France or Germany with the trade value and sell them in retail channel in Spain. And this is something that is already happening, right? And this is why imports to Spain have increased by 40% in recent years. And then moving to private buyers, the most attractive markets are clearly France and Germany, where there is greater supply and therefore higher price pressure. But let's go deeper to these figures for private buyers. And in the next slide, we see in this graph, we relate the retail residual value to the per capita income in each country to provide a kind of indicator of affordability. The result is 0.71 in Spain, 0.44 in France, and 0.38 in Germany. And the higher ratio is the greater effort. The aim is not to is to measure this effort and put it in perspective versus other countries, and we see the financial effort is significantly higher in Spain, over 80% higher than in Germany, and 60% higher than that of a buyer in France. And this explains a significant part of the slower adoption of electric vehicles and reinforces the need, as previously mentioned, to adjust PHEV and BEV prices, both new and used vehicles, to facilitate their uptake.
So once again, Anna, I think we've been building towards the outlook. So maybe you could take us through the expectations for BEVs and PHEVs in Europe and how it compares to internal combustion engines.
Okay, yes, sure. Let's cover before the residual values of internal combustion vehicles that have remained stable over the past year. There is still demand, higher or lower, depending on the country, but prices remain affordable and supply is gradually decreasing, so adjustments have been only slightly negative. In contrast, we are all familiar with the evolution of electric vehicles that you can see in the chart on the left. As we have repeated through the latest webinars, we expect a negative trend in 2025, but the good news, confirmed by first quarter data, is the largest adjustment took place in 2024, meaning the impact in 25 will be smaller negative 3.7%, as a direct average of the estimation of the countries that you can see in the list. And for PHEVs, we expect a minor adjustment, around 2.9% average. This overall performance compared to last year will also be supported by the recent European Union announcement. Although the greater flexibility in CO2 compliance will relieve some pressure on manufacturers, the objectives themselves remain unchanged, as Christoph mentioned before. And it's true that the pressure will be somehow lower and will bring to a more gradual entry of use EVs, which will increase the market's capacity to absorb these vehicles without excessive pressure on prices. But we only expect limited positive impact on RVs in a few countries and not in the short term, mainly because the previous scenario remains stock saturation, especially of 3-4 years old vehicles that are also becoming obsolete, pressure from OEMs, new incentive scheme in some countries, competitive landscape with the new players, very important as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Anna. Well, that brings us roughly halfway through our webinar today. We've already covered some great questions from our Q&A session, and they've been coming in, so please do keep asking. And if we don't get a chance to answer your question today, please don't worry. We will reach out to you afterwards with an email. But now let's move on to our third segment. Christoph Ruhland. Everyone is talking about total cost of ownership, but maybe we should start with a brief definition. What do we mean by TCO?
Yeah, thank you, Tom, for the short introduction. So I will share my screen. So we're moving now from the topic of residual values to the big picture, to total cost of ownership, which is quite a complex topic. So it's like a puzzle, which I try to visualize on the right side here. And very important on the word total cost of ownership is the first word, total. When I speak to many of my customers, when we speak about TCO, they mean energy costs and service. Yeah, but it's much more. It's a big picture. So let's start with a definition. If you have a new car has a list price. Typically, there's a discount. Then you have the transaction price, and then a little bit later on the used car market, the car still has a value, which we call residual value, but it has already lost some of its initial value, which is the depreciation. And you see the depreciation starts at the transaction price and not at the list price. So depreciation is always the biggest single cost factor of new cars. Yeah, if you would compare 10-year-old used cars, it would be completely different. But here we have the new car perspective. So here we are looking at total cost of ownerships of new cars. And then depreciation is always the biggest cost factor in every country, in every segment. Moving on, we also consider finance costs, as 80% of all cars in Europe are sold through a leasing or finance contract. So therefore, of course, the leasing company needs to cover their ongoing costs. They need to borrow money. They need to make some profit. So there is some costs involved to finance it. And then depending on the country, there are acquisition taxes. So this could be the VAT, or it can be a registration tax like we have in the Netherlands, for example. So these are acquisition costs. Now moving on to utilization. So we have insurance costs, energy costs. So this can be electricity, it can be petrol or diesel, or for plug-in hybrid both. Service and wear, tires, and finally we have utilization taxes. And this is how we define total cost of ownership.
So with that understanding, Christoph, taking a look at battery electric vehicles, plug-in hybrids, internal combustion engine models, are they reaching a point of price parity? And I know that we've got a CCE demonstration lined up, but I would just take the opportunity to highlight that this will be an exemplary analysis and that there are directionally similar TCO results for all of the brands. So with that in mind, Christoph, maybe you could take us through Germany to begin with.
Yes, I'm happy to take you through this analysis. So here we are in CCE, Car Cost Expert, which is our online TCO benchmark and simulation tool. We have it for 12 markets and around 500 current new cars. So here we are in Germany, and I've picked the example of the BMW X1 because it is one of the few models that is available as electric, diesel, petrol, and plug-in hybrid. So here we have the electric, diesel, petrol, and plug-in hybrid. We did this analysis also for a few other cars that are available in these 4 fuel types. So we analyzed Peugeot 308, Opel Astra, Mercedes GLA, and also Volkswagen Golf / ID.3. However, the outcome was very comparable, so it always showed the same pattern. We are comparing this model always here in the M Sport trim. So BMW is making a very good job here because the equipment is 99% identical. So we don't need to use the equipment module to equalize the equipment because it's already, you can say it's identical. And we are comparing the total cost of ownership for a scenario of 48 months and 80,000 kilometers. And you can easily switch from the total cost to kilometers, so costs per kilometers and costs per month. But for the sake of this demo, I will show it in the total cost for the 4 years. The calculation goes utilization costs plus acquisition costs equalize the TCO. So this is the sum. And as you can see here, the BEV obviously is not the cheapest car in this comparison, so surprisingly. So if I move to the benchmark mode, then we see that the BEV comes with 1,500 euros higher costs compared to the diesel, but is ranked second. Then we have the petrol car, and finally we have the plug-in hybrid. Yeah. So the BEV has higher acquisition costs. So this is red is the TCO disadvantage versus the benchmark car here, which is the diesel in this case, but comes with a slight TCO advantage in the utilization part. Now let's check where this is coming from. So Car Cost Expert has 4 layers. So I'm showing now maximum layer 2 to make it not too complicated. So we're seeing first the BEV comes with a higher list price. So while the list price for the other models is more or less on par, the BEV comes with a higher list price, which means the depreciation is starting from a higher starting point. Yeah. On top or in addition, we can see that the residual value for the BEV is a little bit lower in euro. Yeah. But combined with the higher starting point, consequently, we have a higher depreciation. And the list price is not a cost here. So the cost is the loss in value. It's the depreciation. And this is what is mainly driving this big TCO disadvantage in the acquisition chapter. Moving on to the utilization part. So we have a slight advantage in insurance, also for the petrol. And we have a disadvantage for fuel, and this needs an explanation because everyone would expect that electricity is cheaper than diesel in this case. So what we have taken here or underlined this scenario is the typical high energy costs that we have in Germany. And we also have underlined a scenario where we include a part of AC charging in the city and DC charging, which is often between 80 cents and €1 per kilowatt hour in Germany. So unfortunately, the BEV doesn't have a TCO advantage in the fuel chapter in Germany here. We see advantages in the area of service, yeah, and also in the road tax, as BEVs are exempted from the road tax in Germany. So all in all, we can say that a BEV doesn't have automatically a TCO advantage in Germany. Now let's move into another market in Netherlands. So sorry, to Netherlands, this is here. In the Netherlands, we see completely the opposite picture. So the BEV is by far the cheapest choice, followed by the plug-in hybrid on the second place. And diesel is by far the most expensive. So what is driving this? So if we look here in acquisition, you can see it has a big advantage in the acquisition taxes. So this is the reason is it's exempted from the BPM, which is the acquisition tax in the Netherlands. Same is true for the plug-in hybrid here. And this is mainly driving this big advantage. And then in the utilization chapter, there is also a road tax, the MRB. So also the BEV is exempted. And this is mainly driving this big TCO advantage. So the TCO advantage is there because the government in Netherlands is making driving ICE more expensive than driving an EV. If we would remove those tax advantages, the picture would be very similar to what we have seen in Germany.
Thank you, Christoph. So maybe then we could take a beat to get your key takeaways. What's your summary for the TCO analysis that you've been conducting?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. I'm coming to my last slide. So first of all, I want to say that the TCO puzzle, which you see on the left, is just too complex. So it's impossible to make broad generalizations like an EV always pays off TCO-wise. So TCO must always be analyzed on a case-by-case basis. So it depends on the model, on the market, on the fuel type and the scenario. Second, the TCO competitiveness of a BEV depends on energy versus fuel costs, the regulation, as we have seen in Netherlands, and of course, the list prices of the manufacturers. Higher energy costs can be a double burden for EVs in this sense, because they're also negatively affecting RVs in countries that have high energy costs. The lower service costs for BEVs are too small to compensate for the higher depreciation and in some markets higher electricity costs. And consequently, OEMs need to optimize their models from a TCO perspective. And this needs to be done in a systematic way and based on solid data.
Thank you very much, Christoph. So that is the end of our third section of our webinar today, which takes us onto the Q&A portion. Now, there have been some great questions already come through via the question box as part of the webinar, so please don't be afraid to continue to ask those questions for our expert panel. They would love to answer them. And once again, of course, if we don't have time to reach your question for today, please don't worry, because we can reach out to you afterwards via email with an answer. So I think something that I'm quite interested to find out in Christoph Ruhland, just on the matter of TCO. Germany is obviously the biggest economy in Europe, making it a very important place for the region. Now, is there hope that the country's TCO profile could ever change and therefore change slightly for the region as well?
Yeah, I think there's always hope, of course, because we can change things. So generally, I believe that the big breakthrough for BEVs will come when they have a clear TCO advantage. So this is the general thinking. If everyone in the countries, they realize that they can save 100, 200, 300 euros per month by driving in BEV, the adoption will happen automatically. And this you can achieve in several ways. So first of all, you could still work on further reducing list prices for BEVs. So this was a German example. even if BMW is doing a great job and list prices are more or less in line. But of course, reducing list prices will help. Second point is you could also increase the costs for ICE. So this is the example that we have seen in the Netherlands. Making driving a diesel more expensive automatically makes the alternative cheaper, more attractive. And lastly, Europe need to work on the energy costs. So energy costs are way too high in many markets. So it's not only Germany, it's also in Denmark or Italy where we see this. So energy costs need to come down, costs for electricity, to make driving a BEV or plug-in hybrid more attractive.
Great. Thank you very much, Christoph. Christian Schneider, I've actually got a question for you if I can. In China, we've seen definitely a take-up of range-extended electric vehicles. So a battery electric vehicle, but there is some component there of an internal combustion engine vehicle, which is helping power the battery. Do we think that those kind of powertrains are going to see any great success in Europe?
Yeah, that's a good one, Tom. I don't know if it's clear for everyone what range extender exactly means. So it's mainly, it is not exactly the same like a plug-in. So it is like mainly the electric engine is driving the car, and an ICE engine is then repowering the battery if it is running too low on energy. So just it is a little bit different like than a plug-in. As I said, we see a big boom in China at the moment for EREVs, but also because a lot of models are on offer, especially for the Chinese market in terms of EREVs. We see that, I mean, they will play maybe a bigger role in Europe, but as we are going forward, as we saw in our forecast, that 2035 targets, where it should be everything should be nearly zero emission, and also plug-ins will slowly phase out. It will maybe play a bigger role for a short period in the near future, but also then EREVs together with plug-in hybrids are going to more or less disappear from the new car market, at least if we stick to our 35 targets, which is another topic.
Yeah, of course. There's also questions of technological advancements. So, Christoph Ruhland, I might come back to you very quickly if I can when it comes to total cost of ownership, because if a electric vehicle, is equipped with a vehicle-to-grid technology where charging can go both ways, power can go both ways, could this affect TCO pricing, or do we think that there won't be that big of an impact on TCO?
Okay, let me think about this question. So, of course, it will impact TCO because it will give you the possibility to charge your vehicle at the point with the lowest price. So energy costs are a big TCO factor, as we have seen. If you, for example, have a house with a photovoltaic system, and you can use bidirectional charging, this could, of course, help bringing down electricity costs. Yeah, and the whole technological advantage, of course, that we see is one of the reasons why residual values for battery electric values are quite low at the moment, because in the moment you're buying a car with a range of 350 kilometers maybe. 4 years later, in 2029, when you want to sell it, we will see something completely different on the market. So there may be cars with 600 kilometers as an average. And then, of course, it's difficult to sell it for a high price. Yeah. So it works in both ways. It can bring advantages, but also disadvantages.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Christoph. I'm afraid that is all we do have time for today. But as I said, don't worry if you have sent in a question, but we haven't got around to it. Please don't worry. We will reach out to you with an answer via email afterwards. So thank you so much for all your excellent questions. Now, that is all we have time for today. We hope you've gained some valuable insights on our EV outlook. Now, for recording this webinar, do head over to Autovista 24. And while you're there, don't forget to check out our next webinar, which is coming up in May, entitled Driving the Future, EV Trends Transforming the Global and European Market. I want to offer a big thank you to our panel for joining us today. They have given us some truly wonderful insights. And of course, an enormous thank you to you, our audience, for attending and submitting so many excellent questions. Thank you all very much, and goodbye.